the Drake Buccaneer. Described as a compact yet potent single-seater fighter designed for speed and firepower, it embodies the philosophy of strike first and strike fast. It was developed by Drake Interplanetary to provide a cost-effective yet heavily armed option for pilots needing versatility in combat. The Buccaneer balances maneuverability and firepower, making it a formidable opponent when piloted by skilled hands. To many around the verse, myself included prior to conducting this review, this ship probably gets overlooked, perhaps forgotten amongst the ever-growing variety of new ships flowing into the Star Citizen universe. So I wanted to take some time and get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of the Drake Buccaneer. I would be lying to you if I told you that I wasn't surprised the first time I retrieved the Buck from my ASOP terminal. Of course, I've seen the Drake fighter in passing, but it wasn't until I bought one in-game that I actually had a chance to take a closer look at things. And once I had my hands on one, I immediately began to wonder why I didn't see this ship more often. You see, the Buck is small, coming in at just 15 meters in length, which is a full 7.5 meters shorter than something like the Avenger Titan. But it carries 5 weapon hardpoints, yes, you heard that right, that are all controlled by the pilot, naturally, as this is a single-seater spacecraft. Just for giggles, I put all attritions on mine, giving me 1 size 4, 2 size 3s, and 2 size 1s, amounting to a total DPS output of 2,163. Which seems insane for a ship this size. Just for reference, the pilot of a Redeemer only has 2,716 DPS when all 4 pilot-controlled weapons are switched to attritions. And the Redeemer is over 3 times longer than the Buccaneer. Now, before everyone in the comments starts going crazy, no, I'm not going to be comparing this to the Redeemer at any other point in this video. That was just to emphasize on how well outfitted this ship is with respect to firepower. Given that I did equip 5 laser repeaters to the ship, I fully expected to be running lean on power, but was surprised to find that I had plenty of energy to max out guns and shields with a little left over to give a bump to my engines. On top of that, the capacitors were able to supply over 50 shots to each of the 5 attritions affixed to the hull. Moving on to the exterior, you can't help but to at least notice the design choices that went into the Buccaneer. Now, I've mentioned it before in my Corsair review that I'm not the biggest fan of the design language used by Drake Interplanetary, but I do see its appeal. And what stuck out to me about the Buccaneer were the 2 seemingly oversized main thrusters affixed to the rear of the ship. And to be honest, I had to laugh to myself because it gives the impression that Drake, as they usually do, just strapped on the biggest engines they had lying around. And whether or not they'd work was a problem for tomorrow. To me, this ship looks like it was born out of necessity, and the fact that it kind of flows together was just a happy accident. Now, if we're talking performance, those over-the-top engines do put out, at least if we're talking about moving in a straight line. With a top SCM speed of 240 meters per second unboosted and 600 meters per second boosted, the Buccaneer comes in as one of the fastest ships in the game, but in typical Drake fashion, it does seem to lack refinement in its ability to perform tight cornering maneuvers. Now, I don't typically fly ships this size. I'm more of a medium to large ship pilot. I enjoy ships with walkable interiors and the opportunity for multi-crew. So just to make sure I wasn't imagining anything, I compared the flight performance characteristics to the Anvil Arrow, which I had lying around in my ASOP terminal. I chose the Arrow because of the similarities in flight capabilities and overall mass, even though the Arrow is technically a light fighter and the Buck is technically a medium. The lines get pretty blurry between medium and light fighters and generally boils down to firepower and armor, but armor isn't a fully fleshed out stat right now. But I digress. Here's what I found. Though able to put down strong numbers in a single direction, the Buccaneer felt inertia bound anytime I tried to take a tight corner. Almost as though Drake engineers put in 50% too few maneuvering thrusters than they really should have. As a result, the Buccaneer felt, in a word, sluggish anytime I had to accelerate to significantly change my velocity vectors. I didn't feel particularly safe flying close to obstacles, even under boosted strafe, roll, and yaw. The Buck would just drift for a considerable difference in line with my original direction of travel. Again, I don't do this type of flying often, so I attempted very similar maneuvers in the Arrow and felt far more confident in my ability to skirt close to obstacles and still come out alive. That is not to say I believe the Buccaneer should be better at this. There should be trade-offs and compromises for every ship, and nothing should be best in slot for everything. If you've been watching my channel for a while now, then you know I'm a firm believer in that. Personally, I think it sits where it should with respect to speed and maneuverability, and personally, I think it has a sort of piloting charm that reminds me of driving a classic American sports car. Great in straight lines, but leaving much to be desired anytime you need a corner. Moving on, there really isn't much to say about the exterior. The Buccaneer needs a gold standard pass, as I wasn't able to find any interactable panels with component access. Maybe the server was being buggy or I missed something. Leave me a comment if you have been able to access those components before on the ship. But now we're going to focus on combat, as this is a combat ship. I needed to see what it could do. For thoroughness, I started off easy with an LRT. Being heavily armed, the Buccaneer is not heavily armored. With only a 1500 HP bubble shield and a 9180 hull HP, it's ranked a bit on the low side as far as survivability goes. So the game plan should never just be jousting with enemies. A full second of continuous damage from even moderately powered opponents will knock down your shield, and just a few seconds of heavily armed opponents would take you right out of the battle. However, as expected with the LRT, the bounty target went down without a hitch. Then I moved on to an MRT, which surprisingly spawned a Corsair in addition to a Retaliator and a 400i, but I found the Buccaneer more than capable of strafe cutting each of the ships continuously, only getting hit a few times by stray shots while I was focusing on a single target and not moving as much as I should. Keep in mind, a few shots from a Corsair were enough to take my shields down considerably and put me into a position where I had to backpedal. One thing to note, even though the capacitors for the guns don't allow me to have the full 75 shots per laser repeater, I found that this was mostly not an issue, as I was almost constantly repositioning to stay out of harm's way, and that allowed my guns to recharge enough for the next volley of outgoing fire. I did not have an HRT available, so I moved on to a VHRT. And this is where the low armor and shields of the Buccaneer became apparent. Facing off against a 400i, a Vanguard, and a Corsair, there was a little bit more firepower to deal with coming from the Vanguard. A second target with size 5 guns posed a considerable threat, and though I was able to nearly kill the Vanguard, an accidental mid-air collision ended the bounty for me prematurely. I'm certain, however, that with another attempt in the Buccaneer, I could have likely finished the bounty off, but the contract marker had disappeared and there wasn't another VHRT available nearby. Even still, I was fairly satisfied with the combat test, and personally, I think the Buccaneer serves best as a support fighter given its glass cannon build with low shield and hull HP. If left alone or given cover from larger ships, it would be a menace on the battlefield with its disproportionately high DPS. The only catch, it doesn't quite have the quantum fuel to follow along with a fleet, so it had to be carried. This is true in Stanton and would be even worse in Pyro, as stations and POIs where you can refuel are much more sparse than they are here. As such, I set to figure out how much space it would take up in the Polaris ship hangar. So I parked the Buck on the side of my hangar and pulled out the Polaris. Once it was up, I opened the hangar and hopped back in the Buccaneer to park it inside. It was immediately apparent that carrying 2 to 3 Buccaneers looks doable, but what else could I fit in here with just the single Buccaneer? As it turns out, I was able to fit the Buck, a F7C Mark II Ghost, and the Anvil Arrow without really having to squeeze them in at all. As such, there was still plenty of room to walk around and get into your ships. Realistically, I could have also brought along a Mirai Fury if I really wanted to min-max the space of the Polaris hangar. So what do I think of this ship? Well, it's a glass cannon attack vessel. I certainly believe it punches above its weight class, as CIG likes to say, in a very practical manner. It just has more guns than other ships its size and some ships that are larger, and for that I give it a thumbs up. I also really like the fact that it's small and can be carried along as a fleet support ship in a fighter role, and it doesn't really have to be restocked beyond fuel, as it is more than capable of supporting all laser repeaters. Also, I didn't mention this earlier, it only carries 4 missiles, so you're not really relying on its missile power to put out big numbers. Then there's the obvious downside of it being a very fragile ship. The low shield and hull HP forces you to stay on your toes and avoid jousting or taking direct continuous fire in general. Finally, despite its high forward velocity, it isn't what I would call nimble. I may have just been imagining it, but as I stated earlier in the video, it felt heavier than other ships of the same size, despite the fact that it wasn't. And this could be because it lacks the maneuvering thrusters to counteract the high forward velocity, especially when coming out of a straight line boost. Then we have to look at the price. Coming in at $110, it's the same price as a Cutlass Black, which puts it in a bit of an odd position because it really is not as useful as a Cutlass Black. You have shorter flight range, no logout bed, no storage capacity, and no potential for passengers, be they crew or otherwise. So if you're looking for variety in your gameplay, this ship just isn't it. However, if you're looking for a glass cannon to carry along in your Polaris, then this is a feasible candidate. I'm just hoping its survivability improves with the addition of engineering gameplay. With that said, for me, it's a ship that you earn in game, especially since it costs less than 2 million AUEC, meaning you can farm one out in just a day or two. If you're going to pledge a ship, I'd recommend going for something with a bit more utility, especially if you're just starting out. But if you just like the ship and want to pledge it, I also don't think you would be disappointed with the purchase. In the right scenario, it would be a very fun little ship to use. But now that you know my thoughts on the ship, drop a comment and tell me yours. I would love to hear from you. Just a reminder, I'm doing a ship giveaway on Christmas Eve, but you have to be subscribed, leave a comment, plus a like on any of the long form videos I publish during the month of December. I haven't decided what I'm giving away yet. We'll have to wait until the Luminalia sales start this year. If you're thinking about joining Star Citizen Universe, please consider using my referral code in the description. And with that, I will end the video. As always, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the verse.